Welcome to a web development with Spring and Hibernate. These are third lessons. Just wanted to give some heads up for a Spring, and we will see what is the basically a requirement of a Spring and why we are using a Spring in day-to-day basis development with respect to Java development. So basically, we will see what is a Spring and what is the requirement of a Spring. So Spring is the most popular application development framework for enterprise Java. Millions of developers around the world use Spring frameworks to create a high performing, easily testable and reusable code. So basically Spring is a framework which is very much used for enterprise Java. We have seen in the last sessions for client server architecture as well as the servlet. Now this is the third lesson where we are just discussing about the Spring. And when we talk about the Spring, basically you need to understand uh, why we are using the Spring. So it's a framework. So basically on top of our client server architecture or this server side component on like a servlet, this Spring framework is getting built, and it is completely a framework. This framework is providing a much more rich functionality and the feasibility for coder as well as the programmers to uh, do this day-to-day basis tasks for creating an objects or maybe any other auto wiring or dependencies. If you wanted to specify uh, the controls, or maybe if you wanted to change the dependencies at the runtime rather without changing any code. So there are many advantages of a Spring. So there are 7 to 8 modules for a Spring Security, Spring Wave, Spring Transaction Management, Spring AOP. So like that. So these are each and every module has a specific role, and each and every module provide a different type of functionality. So millions of developers around the world use the framework to create a high performing, easily testable, and reusable code. So if you are talking about this Spring, so what are the major problems which we are facing in J2E, or maybe when we are working with the sublet? So basically, when you are developing a code with the sublet, you need to specify uh, the code into a sublet. Then every time, if you are just moving servlet to any other business logic, then you need to create a business layer. Then it will be very much tightly coupled, so that now if you are not so tightly coupled means any business layer and any class which is holding the business logic, it is basically having that reference will be provided into your servlet, right? And if you are going with the good design, maybe if you are using a facade layer, or maybe so in facade layer also, if you have created, let's say, your own framework and facade layer, you will route this particular business logic based on the parameters and based on the some command patterns like that. So all you, that is also you can develop, but rather than to develop your own framework, and if there is a, let's say, consider is there is a huge team of developers, each and everybody is implementing his own framework, own style of a code, and not following the complete design or maybe programming styles or the programming guidelines, then how you will identify and how you will maintain the code, as well as that it is a very difficult to debug the code, and it's very difficult to sometimes fixing the major issues. So that Spring is providing a much more feasibility and these major facilities where each and every team member will use that straightforward one single guidelines and guidelines, single APIs for developing the particular J2E application. So that is we are going to discuss it. So Spring framework ecosystem. So this is a basically ecosystem, Spring framework ecosystem. Here we have a web layer where Spring uh, security is there, Spring Mobile, Spring Webflow, Spring Sessions, Spring Web Services, Spring Social. Now there are so many additional facilities or maybe hooks Spring provides. And so basically, if you see that Spring Mobile, so Spring has also provided the separate guidelines or maybe APIs for developing a Spring Mobile framework. Spring Webflow, which is a basically nothing but a Spring MVC, you can say. Spring Social. So Spring has a separate APIs provided to connecting to any other Twitter or Facebook or these kind of APIs to integrate with Facebooks and others like that. Spring Web Services. Spring has also providing supporting for web services. Also, Spring has provided the REST APIs. Spring Session. So basically, session management is also providing. So these are basically Spring for Android. So Android development also you can do, and maybe you can use Spring APIs for integration and development for Android. So these are basically which you are talking about the latest, right? So apart from web development, these are other facilities also provided from the Spring basically for other integrations. Now, if you're talking about common layer, so Spring Core Container, basically, which is provided and managing the life cycle of the beans and other things. Spring Web, Spring AOP, Spring Messaging, Spring Data Access. Data Access nothing but basically Spring. There is templates for maybe providing the access to a database. Spring Test, basically Spring APIs, which is also provided for testing of the application. Spring Web is basically nothing but that one Spring MVC. Spring AOP is nothing but abstract oriented programming, where we discuss about that interceptors as well as this advices like that. Spring Messaging is basically APIs and facilities provided for messaging. Messaging is nothing but when there are we generally use that Java messaging system. So Spring has provided a framework or facilities built on top of a Java messaging service, a Spring Core Container. Now in service layer, Spring Cloud and Spring integration. So basically Spring Cloud is also providing a facility and the API support for developing a cloud-based architecture. And Spring integration is also helping for developing a service-based layer, where you can have multiple things like Spring uh, AMQP here, Spring Data, Spring Batch. Spring Cloud is basically Spring MOPI as well as the data access layer, Spring LDAP. So these are basically facilities also related to a Spring Cloud. So other even Spring has also provided a much more rich functionality, which is related to a Spring Boot as well as a microservices. So in microservice development, completely we do with the help of Spring Boot, and Spring Boot is a very good innovations or maybe facility provided from the Spring Boot, where the developer can easily develop and test, deploy and test the code easily. So I hope you got that. These are a basically major part of an Spring, right? But we will no need to focus as of now, as we are just landing up into a web development. So we will start from Spring Web or maybe Spring MVC, and then we will go till this Spring Data Access or maybe Spring integration with the database and transaction management. What is a Spring? So that is we already discussed. Now history. First version was written by the Rod Johnson, first released under the Apache 2.0 license in June 2003, milestone release in 2004 or 2005. So goals, make why we are using it, make J2EE applications, Java Enterprise development easier, because Spring has provided much more APIs and these frameworks, so that you don't need to develop a many much more code. All these APIs are ready-made available with you. Your design will be getting improved, so that there will be a lesser chance for getting the bugs, as well as for maintaining a code is very easy, and it is also helping for a good design. And design will really help it to you make your application perform much better way and giving a much better results. So make a common task easier, promote a good software development practices. Also, it will help it to you provide good software development, easily testable and maintainable code. Very important point. So developing application is a one part, but maintaining applications and testing and deploy as well as maintaining the application is another part. So If you have done the development and maybe let's say this developer has left the organizations and somebody has taken over this, and then how you will maintain the code, how the people will understand the flow, how they will fix it, and so many things the question marks are. So rather than making this entire people life uh, pathetic, then this particular framework will make the life easy. Key strategies. So lightweight and minimal invasive development with the pojos. So it is very lightweight and minimally invasive development. So the development will not take too much lines of code. Loose coupling through DI and interface orientation. Very important point. So loose coupling. Already we had a discussion because in when we are talking about in any other Java, when we talk about binding, so there has to be a good design. There has to be a loose coupling and higher the cohesion. So loose coupling means the class should not be tightly coupled with each other for a good design. So you should have always loose coupling when you are developing any code, and if you are designing any application. So we get this loose coupling through DI, dependency injection. So dependency injections, so you can just assume that and interface orientation. So we basically interface orientations. When we introduce an interface, basically you can multiple classes can implement the interfaces, and the class can provide through overriding its own logic, right? And then loose coupling DI injections. So basically you can specify the dependency injections. You can provide the injection in the configuration file, or either maybe through annotations as well, and then easily you can achieve that loose coupling. So that is when we discuss about DI, then you will also put a much more focus and effort how we can use that loose coupling and this DI. So DI, dependency injection, is a part of an IOC. That is a very important concept of this spring, that is we need to discuss. And so many times people will ask for what is a dependency injections, what is an interface orientations, why you are using the spring, if you are not using a spring what will happen, what is the loose coupling. These are questions can come up. Declarative programming through the expect and common conversion. Declarative programming. So declarative programming means we have that spring configuration file where you can just provide that specify all the beans. Whenever you create any single class, that class will treat it as a bean. So because any single class, because if you want to instantiate, or if you want to create an object, or if you want it to use into flow, you need to define as a bean. When you are defining as a bean, that bean object creations and loading, everything is taken care by the spring container. So that spring framework is basically taking care of all these things. So there is a basically when you are treating any class as a bean, and you are declaring that bean, the class and details and bean name and everything into configuration, so then you will understand. And there is a proper bean life cycle is there, that is also we're going to discuss, and the bean life cycle is very important. Then the configuration file, and what are the things you can specify in the configuration file for a particular bean, that is very important. So you need to understand basically what is a declarative programming. Elimination a boilerplate code with expect and template. So basically you will use that expect as well as a template. So expect is also very important point here. When you are expect is we will be going to discuss about the AOP, expect oriented programming, then we'll see how we can use it. And templates, so basically you can specify a templates and then you can use it at the multiple places. You can do everything through your own framework, through your own Java development as well, but Spring make your life easier, and then you can easily directly use the API, and you can minimize your code, and you can also minimize your probability of generating issues as well as the bugs, because it is already well tested code and well tested framework. So I hope you got the point. So now expect is, so basically when you are using a cross-cutting concern, let's say there is a logging framework. So when you are writing a logging, every time you are writing a log, so logging is very important to trace the issues or trace the flow. So everybody is using the logging, and you normally specify each and every method normally a logging. Every time you need to write that log.debug log. Sometime you need to specify the fatal, depends on the log level you specify. Generally, if it is just everything goes fine, we use that log level as a debug, and we specify the comments, whatever comments you wanted to print, just to track the flow. But so aspect oriented programming is providing the facility. You don't need to write that details into each and every line of code in each and every function. So you can apply that interceptors, okay, to each and every class, and then it is automatically getting printed. And basically it's on based on working on the based on the advices, and you can say the event. So when the flow will enter into a particular method, then something you wanted to print, you can specify like that. So how we will achieve that is we are going to discuss. I'm just telling you, so that is a cross-cutting concern. So that is a basically a main advantage. Let's say that is a one thing. If you wanted to make a transaction, so transaction is also basically come under the aspect oriented OP. So Spring Transaction Management, whenever you specify any bean which is under the transaction, this you can, so methods, when the methods the flow will come into that method in the bean, so that bean is basically under the transaction management. So in that case, this transaction will automatically start. You don't need to make explicitly begin transaction and transaction like that. So that is through AOP and this cross-cutting concerns, as well as this declarative programming, you can achieve these goals. Now, Spring Framework architecture. So this is a basically Spring Framework runtime, where we have JDBC, ORM, JR, so OXM transactions here. Web. So there is a multiple modules here. If you see that MVC and remoting, web servlet, stars, portlet, that is a basically a web module is there. AOP is also a module, expect oriented programming instrumentations. That is a basically another layer. Core container, where we have beans, core, context, and expression language. So core container is basically managing this entire thing for bean life cycle, generating an object of for beans like that, and then taking care of the life cycles and core and context, and then how we can specify the context, and how we can use the expression language for properties and other thing. That is also you can just use it. These are basically Spring Framework runtime. So this basically is a very high level components, you can say, where you can just see, okay, these are the things which uh, we can learn and we can see inside the Spring. So Spring Framework is basically very vast. It is not very thing like we can just cover, because everywhere Spring has covered and provided the APIs to make the life easier for people. Core container. The core and bean provides the fundamental part of the framework, including IOC and DI. So the core and bean provide the fundamental part of the framework, including IOC and the DI. DI is a basically dependency injection. IOC is a basically immersion of control. So that is you need to understand. That is where the context means the accessing any object defined and the configured. So basically, Spring provide the context through which we will access these beans. So whatever uh, configuration file where we define the beans, a configuration file is nothing but one XML file, which is basically refer, and this context is means. So this context is basically referring to that configuration file where we have defined the beans and all the properties of a bean and DI and everything. So when we wanted to access, then it is basically that context is referring to that particular configuration file. Then expression language is basically module provides the powerful expression language for querying and manipulating of an object. So queries, or maybe if you wanted to access that particular value of a property, that is you can use it. So this expression language is basically used for that. Now, data access and integration. So, if you are talking about normal J2EE, we use that our JDBC drivers, or through which we will just create a drivers or maybe a driver loaders, and we create statements and then call all these things we do. But here Spring provides the complete layer, so we don't need to do all this basic level of coding, creating a connection, loading a drivers, creating a statement, firing a query, getting result sets. All these things you don't need to do here. So Spring is internally manage this. So JDBC provides a JDBC abstract layer. ORM provides an integration layer for ORM. ORM is nothing but is object relation mapping. Basically, you can refer as a Hibernate. So ORM framework basically is a Hibernate. Includes the JPA, JDO, and the Hibernate etc. OXM basically provides an abstraction layer that supports the object and XML mapping implementation for JXP caster. So basically, if you OXM is nothing but when you wanted to convert your Java Pojo to XML, XML to Java. So this kind of a conversion we do basically through a JXP caster API. We can say normally marshalling and unmarshalling. You can use the words like that. XML beans or X streams are basically newly introduced. So that is a basically so these are also provide this thing. GMS Java messaging services. So that is already I told you that Spring provide a rich support for Java messaging services. So Spring messaging is basically on top of the Java messaging. Transaction module support a programming and declarative transaction management. So transactions is nothing but module supports the programming and declarative management. When we talk about declarative and programmatic transaction management. So when we declare means when we specify this transaction management through AOP in the Spring configuration file, that is come under declarative transaction. So here when you specify that transaction management teams manager, you can specify data source, you can specify your data source details, and you can how you can the bean will be using the transaction manager, that is also you will specify, that is a declarative. Programmatically also you can just provide that in a code, but generally when you are using a Spring, we generally don't use the programmatical transactions, right? So, and you can specify transaction attributes also when you are providing the declarative way in configuring into a particular configuration file. So that is the basically added advantages in data access and integration there. So till that time, I hope you got the point. Now web. So web provides the basic web oriented integration features. So web provides the basic web oriented integration features. Whatever we are talking about web module, so means any other controller, or when we are using that the development for web. So that is the basically I nowadays if you are using any other APIs for web development or server side components like that. Servlet Spring MVC implementation. So Spring MVC basically built on top of the servlet. That's I already told you that. So Spring has a dispatcher servlet, that is the main servlet, and then if you are creating any other controller, so controller is also nothing but an servlet here. Struts. So basically, Spring provide a facility for integration with the struts, for integration with class struts with tier within the Spring application. So you can also integrate struts application with the Spring portlets. So portlets are also a facility where you can use which will be used for development. So provides an MVC implementation to be used in a portlet environment. So that is also used for MVC. MVC is stands for model view controller. So that is you can understand. So this is the basically wave. So, but you don't need to just think portlet struts and other thing. Here we are just going to discuss about web and the servlet for basic implementation, so that you will just be very much aware of the basic things about this page. So I hope you got the point till this web module. Now when we start, we will just going to discuss some more details about how we will use it. First, here we just I am just doing uh, you can say concluded this complete session, why we are using the Spring, what is the history, what are the major advantages, what are the basically modules are available, what is the use of these modules, and why we are using it. So these are basically features and advantages.